Welcome to the Fiscally Awesome podcast. I'm your host, Matt Gardner, co-founder and CEO of Hiline. Today we have Anabel Paksoy, people operations guru turned co-founder and investor in her fund called 43. So I'm excited to jump into it. All right, Anabel, thanks for joining the podcast. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me.
Fun fact about Anabel actually was an advisor to Hiline like a couple years ago, helped us figure out some of our early people operations, organizational scale stuff. So got tons of respect for Anabel and what she's done, but we can get into that later. Anabel, I'd love to just set some context, like who's Anabel? What have you done in your career? And then we can maybe just go from there.
Awesome. I've spent my entire career in startup land, and I mean that literally and figuratively. I've been in San Francisco since 2011, just following like the energy that luckily is still here on the ground, even though I know the winds have come and gone on that a little bit through the pandemic.
Still like
pandemic, et cetera.
the most money still comes out of that very small section of the world. So
Yeah,
it still
there's
hasn't
just
lost
like
anything.
it's a hub for sure. You just can't escape it. We joke with my partner here that it's such an industry town that you don't have to do like a meetup of let's get people in tech together or like people in venture together. You just have a dinner and things are going to happen because everybody's just in that world already. Yeah. So yeah, I came out here like it's always been like a gold rush type of spot. So came out here and just started working in startups and found myself in people operations, which is like the startup HR kind of term that Google coined, and did that through a bunch of different like interesting moments. Joined a company that then got acquired by Twitter, joined a company at around 25 people and led the people team until we were just over 600. And that was crazy. That was also like a under 3-year stint. So this is like tripling every year in terms of headcount.
Was that OpenDoor? The 600?
So that's OpenDoor, which is now a public company, real estate technology company. And that was also in what I like to call like the heart of the ZIRP era, which is a term like the zero interest rate period where this kind of up and to the right growth was happening. It's the golden age of like Stripe and Slack and stuff, which is interesting because those companies actually were founded in the wake of the 2008 crash. And so if you get like a little vintage of these startups, and so OpenDoor is like part of that vintage. And yeah, that was a wild ride. And then in the wake of that, I started a kind of boutique consultancy for startup HR from some of the learnings that I had from that OpenDoor experience. And my co-founder there, Natalie McGrath, she was 10 to 800 leading the people team at Coinbase. So the two of us had this like insane kind of time where we would meet up when we were in our seat kind of commiserating. And that's why we wanted to start the People Design House, which we built for the past 5 years.
And that's where I met Anabel, is when you were running the People Design House with Natalie. So we were introduced by Maxine, Maxine was our first guest ever on this podcast. So small world. But that was like, like your experience was so interesting to us. Like even a small company, like not in San Francisco and upstate New York, just the perspective you had on what it takes to build a company and what you need to understand about your people and the operations of your people. Like super great experience for me. So keep going.
Yeah. The People Design House has been awesome because and it's touching on a lot of things you even just brought up here, which is we realized that like how you build your company, like how you hire, motivate, retain, compensate, how you build your team. That's actually not an HR problem, right? That's like a core founder leadership company
business problem. It's like a
right?
Business problem.
Exactly. And so we kept thinking to ourselves, what is the support that I wish I had as like this first people person when I was in house? And what do I wish I could tell the founder I was supporting at the time? And so that's how we built our services. And we stayed super boutique-y, small, founder-oriented. But that's why, for example, you and I spent so much time together and obviously spent so much time with your head of people, Katie, and stuff like that, just because I think what we were trying to do was to say, let's make sure that we're crafting your people function and your company in the image of you, the founders and the leadership, rather than based on a blog post or what you think you should be doing or anything like that. So it was while I was doing the People Design House that I also started angel investing, which I think, again, you have to take in context that in San Francisco, angel investing is like what I like to joke is like philanthropy in New York or something. It's just like people do it. You know what I mean? It's not like people like, so cool. You started angel investing. It is cool, but it's also like in the water that you drink a little bit to become an advisor to startups, or that's what I was starting to do. I was just becoming an advisor. And I was like, hey, can I like throw in a small check as well? And so that became something that I was doing alongside it. And I realized like, oh shit, like my skill set that I'm applying in like this in my day job, I can do on the side as an angel investor. And I guess the work of investing, angel investing, and now professional investing, which I'm doing, and the work of People Ops and the People Design House has all become this like one body of work of helping founders through the journey and in company building. It's just taken on these different flavors. And so the ratio of time I've spent running a services business, which I know you and I have spent some time kind of chatting about, and building an agency business versus starting to raise outside capital so that I can deploy like other people's capital, not just mine, into the deals that I'm winning. The ratio of the time that I'm spending has now shifted towards I'm spending more time on the investing, but it's one big ball of wax.
Yeah, so now you're hooked full time on the investing. So talk about what's the name of your fund? Like, tell us a little bit about like your fund.
Sure, yeah.
You can totally plug it. It's totally fine to plug it.
Okay, great. It's called 43, which is named after a physical space that we have here in San Francisco. I'm here now. We call it like a startup studio. So it's like a live work loft right downtown. And the address of the space is 43 Dorey Street. So we just named it 43. The fund is really trying to be like the first money into like on a founder's journey. So we find that a lot of founders, as they're just getting started, they come in 3 different profiles. One is, hey, I want a little bit of structure and programming. I'm going to go apply to an accelerator. That's like a YC or a Techstars or something. The second is, oh, I just rolled out of a super hot company. I was like the 3rd engineer at Notion or whatever. And so people are just like, please take my money. And then there's a big tranche of people that don't want like that batch-based model. They're not like minted so much so that they can just roll down Sand Hill Road and gather a first round together. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to say, here's a relatively small check, 250 to 500K. Why don't you take this idea that's been nagging at you and go full time on the project, set up your first few experiments. So we like to say nothing's too early. It's almost like professionalizing the angel stage. What you typically would hear is like people raising a friends and family round. Not everybody has friends and family, and it can be hard to hustle up 10, 20K checks. And so we want to be like your first believer and write you a meaningful check for the stage at that. And really, it's the risk-seeking endeavor that we're after. It's like really trying to be investing ahead of any traction or social proof. We don't need anyone else to invest to get involved.
So I want to talk. So there's two forks in the conversation I want to have. I want to talk about people operations, and I also want to talk about like your investor's perspective. But the leading question I have, like people operations, is there's so much business stuff in there. Define people operations in your own words. As someone who's been in it for a long time, you obviously care about it. How do you think about people operations?
Yeah, it takes different shapes as a company matures, as does every function, as it should, and as does every role. But I think that at its core, a people ops function is an enabling function, ideally of a leadership team and a founder. So what that means is that they are like the conduit or executor of putting in place programs and processes and setting up structures that will enable the kind of employee journey. So that means like obviously everything from recruiting, onboarding, management, retention, performance, compensation, all of that kind of gnarly stuff, internal communications, how we gather, how we can connect, and then all the way through to obviously once people move on from your company. And so a great people ops function, what they're really good at, and a people leader obviously being part of that, is not necessarily coming to the mix with a ton of opinions. Yes, you want somebody who, can form an opinion and have a strong belief, but what you really want is somebody who is going to work extracting from the founders and the leaders what they want to do in terms of creating their company, and then is able to translate that to building processes and programs and is thinking first and foremost about the employee experience.
Yep. So do you think that there's a misunderstanding about the strategic value of people operations in most, maybe not in your circle in San Francisco, but if you spoke to the average small business, or maybe even a startup that isn't in Silicon Valley? Maybe they're like in the Midwest somewhere. Do you think they're
Yeah,
missing how important it is?
I'm of two minds of this, actually, because yes, in that have started to people ops, the term that Google coined, and for a long time that was thought of, culture was thought of as ping pong tables and M&Ms in the glass jars and stuff like that. And okay, that started the culture stuff. But actually, there's this obsession with efficiency in startups around, hey, if you're not committing code or you're not like closing customers, isn't it a waste? And everything we should do is about making the engineer happy so that he can hack and code all night long. Right. And that's like why the people ops existed. Whereas I think sometimes in other markets and in more traditional industries, there's actually this deeper inherent value placed on relationships and people, and a little bit of this idea of like work-life balance isn't like a bad word. It's like, no shit, of course. It's not a little bit like, it's not as much of like a drinking the Kool-Aid as like the baseline outside of Silicon Valley. So yes, I think there is a lot we can glean from the kind of this efficiency-driven, innovative orientation towards people ops functions in Silicon Valley and traditional startups. But I also think that I like working with teams like you guys and other companies that are outside of this world, because it's actually, founders aren't like, why am I thinking about this? They're like, of course I should be thinking about this, right? Human capital, my payroll is my largest expense. Why wouldn't I do a little bit more to make that expense feel like it has a good ROI? Yes and no.
So why has it not caught on to the rest of the world yet? That like what you just said, managing human capital is a skill. It's just like managing financial capital. It's no different. But people think about it very differently. And I've always thought about people operations like a force multiplier, right? If you want to go fast, you better figure out how to connect your people and your team to the purpose of the company and what you're trying to go do. So if you can't do that, you're going to be slogging through the mud forever.
Yeah.
And I think there's like a lot of pain companies feel, but they don't recognize that this is a skill you should have in your company, and you should probably make an investment that you've never thought about making before. And I just wonder, like, why is it still not recognized broadly?
I think it's because we can just say it like it is. You're building like an accounting firm too. These are considered cost centers. These are like G&A functions that are like, when you're doing your job, you're invisible, because traditionally HR is keeping the lights on. It's like core payroll compliant benefit. And I think that what I like to say is that those are table stakes. You cannot try to convince somebody that they should do something sexy when it comes to comp or performance management or something if you're missing payroll or if people aren't getting their benefit. Nope, you got to do that. Luckily, there's now a ton of solutions that make that pretty easy. You don't need a full-time headcount to do that. And so I think what's good for the function overall is that that can be one small part of one person's role, and they can have bandwidth on kind of just managing the other pieces. The thing I'd say is, like, for companies that don't think to invest in it, it's like the work of what a people ops person would be doing exists, whether or not there's somebody doing the work. When I say that, if you had people, you're going to have dynamics among them. You're going to have people wanting to know what's next for me. Why am I not getting paid more? Or you're going to have managers who are not doing a great job at holding people accountable. You're going to have people wondering, as you said, what does my work have to do with where the company's going? You're going to have people who you're going to have headcount you need to fill. You're going to have people who are leaving your company. And so that you are doing people ops, even if you don't have somebody in people operations doing the work.
Or you're not doing it.
Or you're not doing it. And so you're doing something that you've heard me say a lot, which is you're accruing, and that's okay. Like, some amount of debt is healthy, right? We should all probably have some amount of debt. We should have some tech debt, which is when you have a messy code base when you're building your product and you're like, I'll fix that later. And obviously making trade-offs in service of speed or in service of budget, those are reasonable things to do. Like, accruing some debt can be a good idea. You will have to pay it off eventually.
Yep.
And the payoff will probably come in the format of angst, typically for the founder, right? Like, we like to say when we're pitching founders for our services, if they're not like interested in what we have to offer, we're like, okay, like, you're not in enough pain yet. Call me when you wake up in a cold sweat because you're like, oh my God, I went from thinking about closing a big deal or building my product to the thing that I'm spending the most time on is like dealing with people. And that's when you realize either you're like, cool, I like that. I want to do that. But usually most founders are like, oh shit, I'm out of my depth here. I need help. And just like any other function where you're like, it's time for a marketing person, it's time for a sales leader, it's time for a product person. That's when usually we find that founders are like, okay, I need some kind of help. And we usually come in and plug the gap before there's like a larger team to build.
Some of they can't pay the interest on the debt anymore. But I think that's true because by the time they call you on the bat phone because shit hit the fan, it's like you're signing up for 12 months probably of undoing everything that you could have prevented if you took some baby steps.
Exactly.
Early on.
Yeah. And I think it's just a matter of founders realizing that this is a little bit of a philosophical thought, but I think that
lay it on me.
I think like when it comes to like workplaces in general, it's like an arbitrage, right? Founders and companies are trying to make more off the backs of their people than their people time, right? And so you can either do that painfully, or you can do that while trying to also have a little bit of fun and make people happy and feel good about it. And if you're really trying to energetically create a healthy company and a good experience for yourself as a founder, making it a little less painful for yourself and everybody else that works there is usually money, time, energy spent, and typically create better business outcomes. So it's a win, right?
100%. And what always fascinated me about our conversations was there was some parallels that I could draw between our two companies. The same thing is true for accountants. Like you used to have a full headcount to do all these things that technology has made so much easier. And in fact, most of the skills that most accountants have are almost being eliminated completely by technology. AI is doing a lot of the recording of transactions, and you don't really need humans to do the same things you used to. So it's the same with some of the people function, like HR and payroll are exponentially easier to manage than they used to be too. What that means is both sets of folks in those industries have to learn how to do more advising, do more strategy type work, which is really interesting and fun, but it's happened really quickly with how fast technology has evolved. So on the technology thread, like companies are getting bombarded with technology. Totally. It's a huge technology inflection point. What's the role people operations are going to play in that, do you think, over the next 5 years? It's like AI, and then what comes after it? It's just going to continue to accelerate, I think.
I can get pretty like weird about this stuff. I have 2 small kids and I'm always like, who's to say what skills they even need? I'm like, just learn how to like mine Bitcoin and like survival skills. Cause I don't know what the hell the world's going to look like. I have no clue. I'm not super future oriented in terms of total future of work, but there are some little things. First of all, I think that with just like other functions, and you've already named it too, the less skilled labor is going to get automated out. And so it is about, and I don't mean less skilled people. I think we all need to realize that it's not about an input output of our hours, which is a good thing, right? I actually think that workplaces in general are going to need to look different from the structure, the time spent. We've already seen a little bit of this happen as people have realized, oh, I can actually do my job and not necessarily need to be sitting at my computer for 42 hours a week or whatever. And so AI will only amplify that reality. And so I think what people operation and companies and leaders at companies are going to have to realize, just like teachers are going to have to realize with kids using AI, is that it's not just about saying like you need to be at your computer for 42 hours a week, or in the case of a school example, like you can't use ChatGPT to write your essay. It's getting more creative about what results look like and what results are. And I think we know that shit in, shit out from ChatGPT. And so the same thing can go toward for companies. Okay, our bars can just go up for how we want people working and what we want people working on. That's a little bit vague. I think what I would advise that people in the seat to do is to take teeny little baby steps to actually leverage it, to up-level yourself, and to keep yourself at that advisory strategic level. Yep. And so something that I think that a very immediate use case that people could be doing is like offering more better support internally. So things like you just said of, okay, a great people team is supporting the founders and connecting purpose and storytelling around like, where are we going? Have ChatGPT generate the first pass of that script, right? Communicate more with your people, like set use it to draft more communications or to help you automatically send Slack messages to check in with new hires. Like, just use it in a very basic way to do what you wish you could do if you had more time, just on the internal communications front. And so I think that's something that I would want to see people doing. Just like my mom could do that in terms of it's not a very complicated thing to do. And then I think that the other thing I think would make a lot of sense for people leaders to start doing is use it to storytell the value of what they're already doing, or to bring some kind of structure to a very qualitative function. It's, hey, I know that Matt has had 3 managers in the last 12 months and his performance is middling. How do I explain to his manager some underlying root causes and what's going on here? And essentially use it as a thought partner to help you like do some higher order thinking on some of the problems that you're dealing with, because it just has so much data. So I think I answered like an orthogonal question there, but I think the point is just about...
That was good.
Okay, great.
Good answer. Follow-up question. So I think about like my dad ran a construction company. Didn't change much in 40 years, right? Like you still swung a hammer the same way. You still used a screwdriver. Then they invented like the screw gun. So it got a little easier, but don't you think that moving forward, the rate at which people will have to drop the skills that made them successful and learn new skills, like you're going to have to do that 7 times in your career? Almost like you hear that people change jobs every 5 years. You have 7 jobs in your career, but it's like doing the same thing, just a different place. Do you think that's going to happen? You're going to have to just constantly forget about what you knew and relearn new stuff.
Yeah. It's why I think I'm of two minds about this, right? That's why I'm hoping that what we start to value most is like relationships, how you get shit done, how you problem solve, how you learn new skills, all of that. But I also believe that it's possible that there's a future where, again, college doesn't exist and it's all vocational skills, right? And so it's this mixed bag of, I think where I always land at, and this is a privileged place to say, is you can do your strengths finding, do that. What are you just really energized by, uniquely good at? And how do you just get really good there and have a good time doing it? I don't know. I
agree with you on a lot of that. I think about what companies, organizations are going to have to manage and navigate through over the next 20, 30 years. You're going to need people who are skilled at getting people comfortable with changing the way that they do things. And that's where I think people operations can be a force multiplier. And I think you're going to see like a huge demand in change agents like that across all companies, or whether it's consultants or businesses that do this as a service or people internally, but it's not going to get any easier. It's very difficult to get people to change.
Yeah, what I'm hoping is, obviously, I don't want the people function to go away, but I am also hoping that what happens is people across all functions understand that people ops is not just a function, but it's like a skill set, and that you can all be like a people ops person, right? You can all like essentially.
That's super interesting.
So yeah, it's like and again, like this work has existed even if someone's not in a seat. And so it's the best manager you probably ever had in your early career was just really good at some of these things. And that may have been like an accounting manager just because it wasn't a people person. But yeah, I do think that the role of workplaces in society has already had a huge change as we've become, overall, we're a little bit less religious and we're a little bit less communal. And so all of a sudden people are asking a lot more of their workplaces in terms of like purpose and meaning in their life.
Yep.
And I think that that's both going to continue growing. But I also think that, again, as automation exists, who knows? I'm not about to plug universal basic income, but I am feeling like there is going to have to be some change in how we function as a society, and hopefully we can figure that out, because there's just not going to be enough work for everybody to do. I think.
Yeah, I think there's a period where you can like 10x whatever it is that you do. You can be very productive, but there's a limit to how many people can be 10x something.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I don't know if it's like tomorrow or in 100 years or 1,000 years, but yeah, it's really interesting. Okay, last question on people operations. Like in practice, if you went into a company, what are the things that you notice that are hotspots? It's like a heat map. Like when do you know there's a grenade or a problem, or they have some things that they need to work on? What are the tells for you?
So oftentimes when you have a founder or a leadership team that have started to turn a little bit sour at their own people, That's what I mean by that is like when some of the founders start to say things like, yeah, they're just like annoyed by people asking them, what's next for me? Or like, when's my comp going to get reviewed or anything like that. And a little bit of that is totally normal. But that's when we realize, oh, okay, you've been a little bit free riding on like the momentum of someone's new or your company's early and you haven't had to deal with anybody. Everyone's just been stoked to be there and has shut up and done their work. And then all of a sudden they come up for air and they're like, wait a second, what's my role in all this, right? And I think when that starts to get on the founder's nerves, that's when we're like, okay, we got to get in here and, build some structures that should help with that. And by that, we mean usually what people want to know is that they are being cared for and looked out for. And a lot of times leaders look at us and they're like, well, of course I care about this and it's done. But we always say that we're evolutionally attuned to negative cues and attuned to ignore positive cues. So if you need to hear something, this is familiar to everybody in their personal relationships. Like, why do we keep wanting to hear that our family loves us? It's because that's just like how our brains have evolved. You miss one negative cue, you're dead. You miss a couple berries, you're fine. But you really need to do a better job just like telling people that you see them and appreciating people. The solutions can be not that complex. And in fact, you probably remember that we are pretty clear about being like, let's actually do the least amount you need to do for the stage that you're at. But that doesn't mean do nothing. I think another thing that we think maybe feels like a time to get involved is when there's a lot of first-time managers that are being asked to carry an individual contributor load in addition to a management. What that usually signals to us is that the function of management is undervalued. That, okay, people management, you should just be doing that as like extracurricular or like homework. It's unclear.
It's like every subscale company, basically.
Yeah, it's pretty common, but I think that what that usually means is that the leadership and the management hasn't understood that there's true leverage to be had in effective people management. If you think that, and sometimes what's happened is that because you don't have great organizational design in place, that you take like your highest performing IC and you promote them into a management role. And then 9 times out of 10, if you haven't equipped them with the tools, then you've essentially lost a great IC and gained a shitty manager. So it's like this double ouch. Whereas like
everybody is 100% done that. If you've run a company, you've 100% done this.
Totally. But what that means is that what you haven't done is been like, oh, okay, the skills of this IC are these and the skills of a manager are these other things. And so let's actually make sure that we are evaluating for these as 2 different bodies of work. And so again, that's like a quick win to be like, are my managers managing? Have I given them like guidelines as to what that is? Have I supported them at all? And maybe my top performing IC should have a path to growth that doesn't include people management if they don't want to. So it's a couple quick things that I think we can do to solve some common pain points there.
Well said. Okay. Those things sound very familiar. I've made both of those mistakes.
Of course, as you should, right? No one's immune to the mistakes. It's just, let's just make sure that I think everybody can feel that they're a special snowflake and we wouldn't get it because our org is like this and it's different for this reason. And I think what's amazing is that history repeats itself. Let's just learn from what other people are doing. So
if you're listening and you're convincing yourself you have not made this mistake, you're full of shit because you totally have done that.
I've done something similar.
Okay. So much of what you're talking about is it's like literally like I view it as like running a business. Like a lot of this stuff, like you need these skills, you need to think about these things. You're going to run a business. So as you started to invest and then deciding that you want to invest full time, what about your background in people operations do you think has made you good at this?
Yeah. Who's to say if I'm good at it yet?
I'm going to assume you're good, but what do you think has made it translated well for you so far?
Yeah. I think the one thing I will say about the feedback loop for people ops and investors is that it's either non-existent or extremely long. So I think I'm well suited to not knowing if I'm actually good at this for a decade, which is usually how long it takes to see a return on your investment. And usually you don't really get a lot of feedback that it's going well other than people being like, yeah, I think I feel better a little. So in that way, it's been like a smooth transition for me and less acutely painful for me than other folks. But I think not every investor invests the way that I do in terms of how early that I'm investing. And I like to joke that investing at the stage that I'm investing at, like this angel stage, this really like person idea phase, is the only stage I'm qualified to invest at, because at this point, it's truly talent spotting. If you're a growth investor, like if you're like, oh, I want to, public markets, or I want to take a company public, or I want to give someone growth capital go from Series D and on, that is a truly different skill set. And so my skill set of understanding what makes somebody effective as a leader, as an operator, as an just doing company builder, I think is uniquely suited for investing at the earliest stage. So I think that just baseline there, what I'm doing when I'm evaluating an investment opportunity is I'm evaluating the person. And we can go into some of that criteria, but that I feel it doesn't feel like a new skill set. I think the thing that is probably just like unique to Anabel. I don't think a lot of people are necessarily hyper risk seeking. As an HR person, I had a very high risk tolerance. Like I just in general felt like people weren't going to sue us, like if everyone's. And so that I think as a risk seeker, I'm also separate from my HR background. I think it makes me better suited to invest, especially at the early stages.
Interesting. So what are some of the things you're looking for? So actually, I have a first quick question. So when you agreed to advise us once upon a time, and I also remember when I went to meet you, I met you at the airport hotel.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that? Were you talent assessing me at that time to see if this was?
Yeah, no. So I think when I meet people, I have a few very qualitative criteria. One is I really like to understand someone's true life story. And I don't mean that in a sugar-coated way. I think I asked you, like, where are you from? Tell me, you told me about your family and your background and why you stayed in Rochester or Syracuse and like all that. And I want to know like the full context. And so I think it's actually relatively disarming, I think, to meet me as a founder, because when you're out there fundraising, you have a pitch and whatever. And I'm like, like, where are you born? Who are your parents? What's going on? Tell me the full story. I am really interested in somebody solving a problem that they were meant to solve. It doesn't have to be, it can be personal or professional, but someone who, and in the case of you, Matt, like just to put you on the spot.
Oh boy.
I know that you like kind of were an accountant partially just because that was your trained skill set, but like truly your calling is to be an entrepreneur. And so that's what I think is beyond accounting, like what you're doing with Hiline and all of this. And so I think that to me, just to understand someone's why is a really important when you're investing, because the journey of starting a company, especially in rapid growth, venture-backed company, where you're trying to create some kind of crazy outsized return, the journey is very like spiky up and down. It can be exciting. It can be draining. And I think you've got to be buckled in and buckled up for a lot of pain. And it's going to be a decade, if not more, before you like see any kind of outcome, and your chances are going to fail. So I think I want some kind of real commitment to a problem space. It doesn't have to be the specific idea, but the problem space. So that's what I'm really trying to understand.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think you said that this is the case, but I'm going to ask it directly. Do you think that your approach gives you an edge with founders? Like they just find your approach more interesting and to them as they're looking for a partner? Because it's like a very important decision, right? Like when you're the ideation phase, you need somebody that you really want to be in business with. So do you think that gives you a leg up on some of the competing funding sources that are out there?
I do not. I think you're dancing around something, and I can give an example that kind of illustrates this. But yes, I think people like to know that I see them and want to know. A lot of times what I'm asking them is not just, okay, give me your background. When did you first start working on this idea? Okay, then what did you do first? Then what did you do second? Then what did you do third? And then what did you do? What did you take from what you learned, what you did 1 through 3, and how did that inform 4, right? I want to know like thinking, and that's like very much like almost like a talk rating interview, right? So it's like behavioral. And I think people like that I'm really interested in that. They like that I'm more interested in, I assume that they know more about the problem than I do, all of that. And so I think what I'm trying to get at is my way of operating and being with people, I think is different than an investor has. Oh, I have a couple of theses I'm throwing around this. I want to see people solving problems in this space. I like Stanford grads. I like YC alums. I'm not like putting people in boxes in that way. So I do think that's disarming. I also think the thing is that I think they can immediately understand what it would be like to work with me. So I don't shy away from like gnarly situations. And here's an example of a founder that had taken a little bit of investment and I really wanted to get into this deal. And he didn't need my check. Like he could have just taken other angel checks. He had plenty of people knocking on his door. And he started telling me that he had just left a different company and that the departure was a little bit weird. And I think a lot of people would just take that at face value, I think, and just be like, okay, or not ask more questions. And I said to him, I was like, I really liked meeting you. I'm going to find out more about this. So I just went the way that I would like back channel any executive hire or anything, right? And I figured out, I got to the founder of the company he left. I asked the board member of the previous company. I got a picture and then I brought it to the founder. And I was like, here's what I have learned. Tell me more about this. What actually happened? What's going on? And that is just kind of assumption that there's a lot going on here, that a lot of emotions are involved. A lot of people have a lot of competing. I'm not making snap judgment. I'm bringing my, like what I learned back to him for his reaction. I think he literally giggled and was like, wow, okay, you like went to this, you figured this out, and then you brought this to me for me to weigh in on this. And like, not only was I, and all of my questions, it made me more convicted that the way that he reacted to this was like, made me more convicted that I want to invest in him. And I think that he realized like, oh, she's not going to shy away from when shit gets weird or real. And I got the check-in.
Everybody's got some weird shit in their background.
Right.
They're just either going to tell you about it or they're not.
And no one's squeaky clean besides maybe, I don't know, Obama. And even he did cocaine, right? I don't know.
Oh man, that's good. No, I think that's really interesting. So like your fund, what are you looking for? Are you like on the AI hype? What are you interested in? What problems are you?
Truly, this is like a boring answer, but because we're so early, we just want to meet the smartest people anyone's ever met, right? And if someone is doing something, and to answer the question head on, interestingly, we ran a quick analysis on our first fund, and it was like, at first, we wouldn't have said that we had an AI focused fund, but at the end of the day, like now, especially in San Francisco, everyone's just using AI regardless of what they're doing. So it doesn't have to be an AI company. It's not the healthcare company. Of course, they're leveraging. That's an ag tech company. Well, of course, they're using it. So it's not like we are after AI. Like anyone who's not using AI is almost not interesting anymore, right?
Yep.
And so we don't have to be an AI fund. So I think to just be like, yes, we're very involved in AI. I want someone, if someone I need is, oh, you got to meet my previous colleague or my buddy, they're starting something like the smartest person I ever worked with or whatever. I'm like, yes, I'm not like asking them, wait, what are they building? Typically, I just feel like for me, I don't see venture dollars being the right type of capital for certain styles of business. So people that need to buy a ton of inventory or need to spend a ton of money on like customer acquisition, those businesses don't attract me just from a business model standpoint. And I usually like people who are disrupting dull, dusty, boring industries. So I have a lot of stuff in like construction, insurance, healthcare, stuff like that.
Very cool. Very cool. That's fascinating. Construction's another one. That is an old, dusty industry.
Yeah. I love like someone who's come up or my dad was in construction and then I did this thing and I realized this from my professional background and now I'm doing this other supply chain management or I'm modeling out plans and I have some unreasonable advantage here. This is what I'm looking for.
Yeah. Interesting. AI, don't you think it's like AI? Is AI like an industry? Is it like this weird thing where I don't even know if it's an industry versus like it's just now an attribute of every other industry?
Yeah, I think it's a toolkit, right? So I think the question is like, are there people building toolkit? Like people who are building AI tool that specifically to push the industry forward. That's, I guess, the closest like AI for AI or like tools for AI. Right. But I think what I'm interested in more is people applying AI within other verticals.
Which every business should be doing it.
Yeah. I think we have all been doing it. It's just now it's cheap enough that it can be really like it can be done at a different scale and at a different intensity. And so that's this uptick we're all seeing right now, which is like all of a sudden it's more accessible and it will continue to get more accessible. It's at this weird crossroads where it's not actually that accessible because it ends up being expensive for small companies, blah, 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 blah. But that's the same thing that happened with like cloud computing in like the early aughts. Right? It was like the idea of running a really quick, fast query meant you had to have a physical data center yourself. And then with the cloud and AWS, that went away. So it's just, this is just the next frontier. And we'll see how we have a lot of amnesia like in startups and all that. So we'll see like how quickly we forget that this was like some kind of weird boom.
And you're in your first fund, right?
Yeah. So we are almost fully deployed out of our first fund, which was just a $13.5 million fund. So that's considered a small fund. Anything under 20 million bucks is like a pretty small fund, and even really under 100 million is considered a small fund. We're going out to raise our second fund. The target is between 30 and $40 million. I have 2 other partners. We each invest kind of individually, and we're starting to fundraise in the next couple of months right now. And the idea is just to keep doing what we're doing. I think we had a lot of learnings from the first fund of what works, what check sizes work, what positioning works. But yeah, raising the money to actually fund a venture capital firm, that's probably the newest thing I'm doing as a full-time investor. And it's not the most fun, but it's interesting for sure. So,
all right. So for potential LPs and companies, where can they find out more about 43?
Yeah. So 43.io, super simple, like Notion landing page. So yeah, go to our website or just, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty good at LinkedIn, meaning I'm not great at all at posting on LinkedIn. I'm an offline gal, but I'm good at responding to LinkedIn post messages. Yeah, if anyone wants to talk about anything, truly, if you're building a company and you're being kept up at night, if you have a gnarly situation you need to deal with, or you're trying to figure out how to advocate for yourself in your next performance review, or you have a friend who's working on something cool and wants to talk to an early stage investor, like I'm up for anything. So.
Okay. So I'll send you a LinkedIn message when we're done, Anabel.
Please do, Matt. Yeah.
Okay. Can we do a little rapid fire before we wrap it up?
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So what advice would you give to somebody who's considering making a pivot into investing like you did?
So I think just realizing like no one's going to give you permission, especially I think we're talking about angel investing, I'm assuming, right? Like ultimately,
maybe someone wants to ambitiously go start a fund like you did. Just like get out of operating a company and backing other operators.
Yeah. So I think if you don't have any capital, I would become an advisor. So I would ask for people to essentially give you equity for your time and essentially start building your own portfolio. Start writing small checks, build a little bit of a track record, start participating in other syndicates on angel lists and stuff like that. And then let that probably ripen for maybe 18 to 24 months. But just get started. Don't feel like you have to be some kind of fancy person to be an investor.
Super fun. You learn so much doing it too.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. Boldest prediction about the future of work and people operations.
I think that future of work is that we're going to be doing a lot less work, meaning like work and life. Yeah, it's just like work and life are going to continue to integrate. And I think ultimately, like the jig is up that we all can get like rich working, or that we even all can survive working in the normal ways. I think there's going to only be more and more creative ways to make a living, hopefully. And I think that is the future. People ops, I think you've made the prediction. I'm with you. I think really great people who are really strategic will be here to stay. You know, the more tactical stuff will get automated away. And what I imagine is that kind of thing I said before, which is it's going to be more a skill set than a function.
How long do you think it will take to make that transition? Like the next generation workforce, going to happen? Because this is not a skill that 95% of people have.
I think we've already seen a generational shift in the workforce. Gen Z is already demanding even more in terms of like purpose, meaning from their workforce. So I think, I don't know, once our kids are working, I imagine that, think about like the way that we're parenting our kids. Like I imagine that they're just the idea of empathy being a default reaction, that gentle parenting in the workforce, we're going to see it, right? Like I
think that's, man, I can't think about my kids going to work yet, but.
Gen Alpha, right? Isn't that what they are? I don't even know.
Is that what their generation is? Gen Alpha?
I think so. Yeah. The kids of millennials, I think.
Gen Alphas. Man.
Yeah, right, I'm not sure.
We'll talk in 20 years and then we'll compare.
That's my typical feedback loop. So that's fine with me. I'll be here waiting for my
We'll know by then if you're a good investor.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you are, for what it's worth.
Okay, cool. Let's hope.
All right. Anabel, this has been a lot of fun. I learned a bunch today from you, actually, from this conversation. And I think at some point in the future, it'd be fun to have you back and see how it's going with the fund. But we appreciate you being on, and it was good catching up.
Yeah, congrats on Fiscally Awesome. Stay awesome.
It is awesome.
We will, and we'll definitely chat again. Talk to you soon, Matt.
Sounds good. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.